Hello, everybody. Happy Pride readers. Welcome to Pride Book Fest. I'm Celeste Castro. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the author of 4 own voice novels. My latest, Prize Money, was released with Interlude Press on May 11. And in addition to fiction, I'm also a staff writer with Hispanic Notes, which is an online magazine for Latinx writers where I write essays and poetry. And I am so excited to bring you In Our Words, a call to action, a conversation with authors whose work appears in the Bold Strokes books anthology, In Our Words, Queer Stories from Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Writers, a thoughtfully curated collection of short stories at the intersection of racial and queer identity. And today, we're going to have a conversation on diversity in publishing, the importance of own voice works, and through our dialogue, we hope to inspire actions that you can take today to diversify the literary community. First, let's meet our panelists, and starting with Mayapee. Stage is yours.
Hello, and thank you for having me. I'm Mayapee. I'm from England. You can probably tell by my accent that I'm from England. It's really cold and rainy here. I have published 7 books in total. 2 of them are non-fiction about my divorce, a series. So there was the Divorce Toolbox and the Post-Divorce Recovery Kit. I think the side titles are self-explanatory. I write in different genres. I also perform my poetry and music. And I've also written for I've written various articles for different online journals. My day job, I'm a teacher. I'm also a mother of 1, and I'm very, very excited to be here today at this event. And I'm really, proud. I feel very privileged and honoured that my story was one of the ones that was chosen for this beautiful anthology.
Okay, so Anne Shade, you're up.
Hi, I'm Anne Shade. I had the pleasure of choosing the stories for this wonderful anthology, and I am a Bold Strokes author. I published 2 books under Bold Strokes, as well as a story within this anthology. I have a 3rd book coming out under Bold Strokes in the fall, and I'm hoping this is just the first of many. I'm going to put that out on blast, putting it out there so that it sticks. And I appreciate how everyone has, submitted their stories and given us the opportunity to give their stories, share their stories with everyone.
Thank you. Akil.
Hi, my name is Akil Wingate. I'm a writer, filmmaker, and explorer based in Paris, France. Really, really honored to be a part of this anthology among so many other talented writers and storytellers. For my part, I've written for a number of platforms and magazines and published in a number of anthologies and series. I currently present a game show in the UK on Channel 5 called The Live Casino Show, the docuseries The Normal Show, and 5 Minutes News for AI. Besides that, you can always find me on social media somewhere under my name, Akil Wingate, either getting into trouble or causing trouble.
Excellent. All right, LaToya.
Hi, I'm LaToya Hankins. I use pronouns she and her. I'm the author of 2 books, SPFC and K-Roll, The Sweet Face of Sisterhood. I'm also a short story writer and literary reviewer, and I have a blog called Pate and Caviar, a flavorful memory of childhood, that's on my website. And I'm glad to be in community with so many exceptional writers and looking for a great event.
Excellent. Thank you all so very much for being here today, and I am personally honored to engage in this discussion together. So a little bit of context setting. 2020 was one for the history books. COVID-19 exposed racial disparities and helped cast an even brighter light on the problem of systemic racism, which is at the root of so many problems that we're wrestling with today. It's embedded in every aspect of our society. In fact, racism is now recognized as a public health crisis in the United States. And 2020 also brought nationwide protests. the largest racial uprising in the United States of America in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. Needless to say, it was a difficult time in our human existence. And for many of us, we used writing to channel much of what we felt. And for some of us, writing changed. And we used the growing momentum to make statements and inspire change of our own. And our panelists live in the US, the UK, and France. And so I'm wondering if each of you can tell us how what was going on in your areas impacted you and how, if at all, writing helped you cope. Let's start with Akil.
Well, the video that surfaced and circulated throughout the world of George Floyd's execution, for me personally, was sort of a dredging up of a traumatic past that I personally lived through in the U.S., also at the hands of the police. If you bear with me, my brother and I, when we were high school kids, were on the way to a speech and debate conference many, many, many years ago when I was 14 and my brother was 16. And my father was a university president. Now he's a pastor. So worked with many politicians. My family was somewhat well known within the community in North Carolina at that time. And we were driving to go to a school debate conference at 5 a.m. in the morning. And my brother had a white Trans Am that he bought and paid for, working a part-time job at a fast food restaurant. We were pulled by the police. The police came directly up to our both of our windows, pulled their guns on us, put the gun, I remember distinctly, put the gun directly to my face and to my brother's face, took my brother, put him in the back of the car, and my immediate thought was they're going to kill my brother. And I broke down in the car, had no access to anyone to help us, not my parents, not family or friends. And we're stopped by virtue of the fact that we were two Black kids in a white Trans Am driving to a speech and debate conference at 5 a.m. for our school, to represent our school. And we were the only two children of color representing the school for an international speech and debate conference. After they found out who we were, the police let us go. And then when my father was contacted by the school to tell them what they had done to us, the police protected their own and acted like nothing happened. And then that same day, when I presented my own speech for the speech and debate conference, one of the judges accused me of plagiarism because he did not believe that a Black boy could write and communicate in the manner in which I did. All this within 24 hours. And for me, watching what happened to George Floyd suddenly caused this flooding wave of trauma to come back to me. And here in Paris, our lockdown is very, very, very strict. I don't know how it is for everyone else, but for us to have these two catastrophes collide at the same time, when you have no access to a support group, no access to your friends and family, no access to loved ones or anyone who could reinforce in your mind that you are worthy, that you are valued, that you are loved, it was, for me, as I've said before, absolute and pure hell. Because over and over and over again, you replay in your minds the things that have happened to you at the hands of the police, by virtue of the fact that the color of your skin is not acceptable to people who wield power in such a way and such a force that you are deemed inhuman and unacceptable. But also at the same time, watching the pandemic rip through so many close and loved ones, as well as leaving us in this sort of period of uncertainty about where this is going, I personally felt challenged in two respects. I wanted to go out and protest with everyone else here in solidarity for Black Lives Matter and against police brutality here in France, because it is also a very, 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 how should I say this? It is just as relevant here in France as it is in the US, because we have some very horrific stories here in Paris, for example, where a number of people of color have been killed or abused at the hands of the police here as well. And so the waves of protest that were out in the streets in Paris were in defiance of the police, but also in defiance of the lockdowns that were put into place by the Macron presidential administration. And so ultimately for me, I can speak for my personal experience, but also for some of my colleagues' experience here in France, that as a person of color, as a Black man, as a Black gay man, it was one of the toughest periods for me to go through in terms of my own mental health and my spiritual health and my faith, and to watch it play out over the screens on a daily basis.
Akil, first, thank you for sharing that your trauma with us, and I can't imagine what that must feel like. And it's very powerful, these stories, and I'm so thankful that you shared with us. And I want to turn over to Mayapee, who lives in the UK. What was it like for you? What were you going through? How did you feel?
Yeah, same as Akil. George Floyd, it really, resonated me. It sent shivers down my spine. It also took me back to my own childhood. I live in Leicester, which is we're in the East Midlands, and we were actually in an extended lockdown. We went into an extra lockdown. I don't think we ever really came out of it. And people felt so strongly that even with these restrictions, people were going out protesting because they felt so strongly about it. But it resonated with my own childhood as well. I was brought up in Barnsley, South Yorkshire, and whole childhood it was very, very, it was racist. It was completely racist. I've written about it in my previous work. You couldn't walk down the streets wearing a sari without being, stared at like you're an alien or something. I mean, I was called everything under the sun when I was younger. Packy, brownie, blackie, even. They started some club at school, and they said, "Oh, it's for 5 and 6 year olds." And I said, "Oh, I'm 6. I can join in, and I know all about this club because I can't remember what the club was entirely." I said, "But I know all about this. I know all about that." I said, "Yeah, but you're Black. Black. That's what they said. You're Black, so you can't join it. You're 6, but you're Black." And I found that I was in the choir. I could sing, and I didn't get the solo parts. And then when I did, eventually, it's like, well, why they're letting that brown girl sing? She can't even sing. Because what happened to me was I went on stage, and I mean, this was during the dress rehearsal. I went on stage, I completely froze. I was nervous, and it was like I couldn't sing. It really was. And they were all laughing at me that why did they give her the part in the first place? It was literally bringing back the pretty white girl. But then on the final show, which was a Christmas performance, I did it. And since then, that's what made me realize about, proving people wrong, fighting, despite the fact that it can lead to a brutal incident like George Floyd, that we need to still keep raising this awareness, through events like Pride, because hate crime still happens in the UK, and it is aimed at people who are transgender. Not just them, but I mean there is hate crime. There's homophobia, bigotry, all the things that really still send shivers down my spine. And for me, writing was a very, very cathartic release. And lockdown, I mean, there are some aspects of the solitude that I welcomed, because I mean solitude is it can be quite nice for a writer. And that's when I went into my own, and I was writing even more. And sometimes I've been a little bit censored and repressed with my writing. And one thing that Bold Strokes books, this anthology gave to me, I thought, I don't need to hold back anymore. I can just be free with my writing. And I absolutely, love the ethos of Bold Strokes books, because I now live in Leicester. Well, I've been living in Leicester on and off for about roughly 30 years now. I left in between to go to university, get married and everything. Not married anymore, which is why the divorce books came out. Another story. What I did find in Leicester was, it's lovely. It's really nice. There are these close-knit communities, but I find that it's a little bit cliquey. I still kind of feel like the outsider because I remember, Celeste, you said the other day, the area that you're from, people may not have heard of it. I think the area in India that my parents are from, a lot of people haven't heard of. It's Assam, the northeast of India, and it's a place that people haven't heard of. And back in the late 80s, early 90s, my family were in the minority. There were not many Assamese people in Leicester. And in terms of writing in the literary circle, I do find that there are some groups that will just be very, very cliquey, stick within themselves. If say there's a Gujarati or Punjabi, writer that's good, but then there might be somebody else that's even better, say Assamese. I'm not saying that I'm the best or anything. They would stick to their own, and in some ways it's good for them that they stick together, they support their own. That is good, but then for the people who are in the minority, that can be awkward. You find that you have to really prove yourself, and that's why the whole ethos of Bold Strokes books resonated with me at so many levels. And the lockdown was a time when writing really helped me, and it did bring back those traumatic memories of racism as well. And when I returned to teaching, we automatically have it in the curriculum anyway, even the hidden curriculum that you've got to promote EDI, equality and diversity. But I found that my students, they felt so strongly about it. They were bringing it up because we were studying texts like Maya Angelou, I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. And they were saying that, Miss, we're still fighting for these issues today. What's going on? They felt so strongly. So that's what the impact was and still is, following George Floyd. That's how, people felt so strongly about it, and still do to this day.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that with us. And yeah, I think I'm on the same boat as Akil and Mayapee, and thinking about my life and things that I've experienced when I was a little kid. And yeah, I get that and identify with that. And turning it over to you, please share with us a little bit about your experience in 2020 and how that how writing helped you cope.
Seeing the George Floyd video, which I still to this day cannot watch completely. I've only watched to a certain point, and I get so anxious, and even now just thinking about watching it to that point, I get very anxious and just want to cry and scream and just, I don't know. I ended up pulling all that out of me and pouring it into poetry, which I haven't written in years. So I would say within a matter of 2 weeks, and it actually started with the Ahmaud Arbery incident and then the Breonna Taylor. So all those three things came clashing together within me to the point where the only way I can cope with it was to get it out without having a nervous breakdown. And it all came out in poetry. So I'm usually a very happy-go-lucky, glass half full type person. And I think that might have come from growing up I know you're in Chicago. Growing up in Chicago, people think the Midwest, oh, there's nothing wrong in the Midwest. There's nothing going on. But when you're a young Black woman growing up in predominantly Black neighborhoods in Chicago, you have a mother who's of a very lighter complexion, and she's very proper, very prim, very, and she's teaching her daughters that. So you get called, Oreo, you get called little white girl, you get called names that are just not conducive to helping you dealing with your own self and your own insecurities as a Black person, let alone a young Black woman in America. And then we had most people would think the fortune of moving out of Chicago proper and moving to a suburb called Bolingbrook. And we were literally, and it wasn't even on the map of Illinois yet. We were one of 3 Black families in the entire town. And that actually kind of made things worse. I mean, even though we were doing better, we weren't living in apartments, going from apartment to apartment. We had a house, we had a nice townhouse, we had a yard, and we got literally the white picket fence and the dog, and everything was going great until you start realizing that people are looking at you differently because you're a Black person. You come and invaded their town. And it wasn't vocal. It wasn't outward. But I think the worst kind of racism is the one that's more subtle, because it's nothing that you can pinpoint, but you can feel it. And so with all that came back, just like with Akil and with my Mayapee, it all came back within those few weeks of all that stuff happening, and all that was poured into my poetry, and that's how I dealt with my writing. And I found I actually couldn't work on the novels that I was working on at that time, and one of them happened to be one that took place during. It was a historical that took place during the Underground Railroad period, and I was having to deal with racism in that book, and now I'm having to see all this racism happening in the public eye and nothing coming of it. And I still haven't worked on that book. I've set that book aside because I can't bring myself to face that. Um, I ended up going to protests. I'd never been to protest in my life. I went to several protests in town, and then realized that living in suburban New Jersey, West Orange is not the wonderful world that people think it's going to be. Just like with the Midwest, someone posted after George Floyd. Someone posted on the town Facebook page, to the police department or to the mayor, can you what can you do to make your Black residents feel comfortable and that they're safe within our community from the police? What are the police doing? They were asking very valid questions, and someone actually had the nerve to put, oh, I've lived in West Orange for 26 years, there's no racism here. I haven't seen anybody treated any differently. That got me angry too. So I spent most of the summer of 2020 as an angry Black woman, which I said I would never do. I have white neighbors. I couldn't talk to them. I couldn't even just to deal with anybody. It really made me an angry woman. And I had to actually literally pull myself out of that. And fortunately the poetry did that. And then when Bold Stroke Books decided to do In Our Words, it was kind of like my piece, because I felt like I was finally doing something and giving something back that could help others, that could give other people voices, well-known authors as well as new authors who haven't, felt comfortable. Like Mayapee said, she never felt comfortable before, giving voice to that. And I felt like, here's my opportunity to give voice to that and to give back in a time where the world is just so ugly and so horrible. And even now, I have that anger still, and I have to force myself. Our neighbors have little get-togethers, and I force myself to go over there now, so I don't get to the point where, because I've been working from home for over a year, when I go back to work, I'm not going to be able to talk to anybody who's not of who's not of an ethnic race. So um, that's how I've dealt with it, is just trying to, pulling things together in my writing, trying to get back to my writing, which I fortunately did, and giving back wherever I can. If I can donate, I can. If there's a protest, I'll do that. But just trying to give myself where I had normally not done that, because I had a bit of a blinder on for so long that maybe it's not so bad out there. And the George Floyd video kind of slapped me in the face and said, yeah, it's still bad.
Yeah, and I'm with you. Like, anger really drives me. And I realized that the other day, like, I am so angry, like things that happened to me when I was a kid and to our family. And it was kind of an aha moment that I have a lot of anger inside, and then I'm grateful to have writing to be able to channel that and volunteer and donate, and I'm in that same boat as you. I want to talk about the anthology a little bit, but I want to make sure that we capture LaToya's voice. LaToya, can you share with us a little bit about your mindset last year and where you were at and how writing helped you cope?
Hi. So last year was just a series of traumas aside from the George Floyd situation, just in my personal life. And with all things, I turned to writing myself. Akil's experience of North Carolina, and so unfortunately, what he was referring to does not surprise me. I'm a little bit curious about what section of North Carolina, but unfortunately, being that I've lived all over the state, he could tell me anywhere and I wouldn't be surprised. The George Floyd thing, on top of the other killings that had taken place since, during, and after, it's just on top of trauma to the point where I'm not easily broken. But I found for my peace of mind, in order to live, I had to disconnect from looking at anything news related. You know, I found myself getting deeper into music and mindless entertainment. God is blessed for Netflix and Hulu because that helped keep me sane. You know, the sleep nights that I had because of the trauma of seeing and hearing, I turned to my writing. And so being that I was working from home, that gave me a good way to utilize my talents. You know, I write because I like to create my own reality. And unfortunately, this past summer and this past year, the reality was just unbearable for myself and for so many others. I attended protests and I supported those who took to the streets and raised their voices because we have to speak up or else our silence will be taken as consent. I give thanks that we as artists are allowed that venue to express ourselves and to give voice to those who have not had the opportunity to do so. I feel that this anthology is a blessing to those who have the opportunity to write and contribute, as well as for those to read, because we have to use our art to push back against oppression. You know, if you can't see us as individuals just worthy of the basic human rights of being able to walk down the street, to jog, to go to the store, to just be, not even doing anything outside of just sitting in a car, minding our business, coming home from the grocery store, but we're in the passenger side, we're not driving, we're minding our own business. If we are not allowed to be just ourselves, to exist, then we have a responsibility to push back against that. We have a responsibility to use the talents that we have been given to say that's not okay. So I really feel that with the mindset of taking what is negative into what can be positive, this year, with all that was going on, gave me permission to be authentically a writer, to give me permission to harness that side of myself. Because I work a full-time job, I'm being pushed over to the side to snack, bits and pieces. But this is what I need. This is for me as a Black woman who identifies same gender loving. This is necessary. This is air. This is oxygen. This is food, water, and shelter. This is a basic need. And so I feel thankful, dare I say grateful, for the travesty that took place, for allowing me and giving me permission to just delve into writing.
Celeste, do you mind can I just piggyback on something that both Anne and LaToya said?
Absolutely.
Firstly, LaToya, I was in Charlotte, North Carolina, the Queen City, when my brother and I were attacked by the police. And to something that Anne said that was poignant, the idea of anger is valid. Anger is valid. I was taught that some years ago, that anger is valid. When the oppressed finally decide that we will no longer be oppressed, whatever force and energy that we use and that we harness to break the shackles of oppression, be it anger, be it joy, be it anything that comes from our soul and from our inner being, it is valid, because the oppressed will no longer be oppressed. But also, I like to look at it from the standpoint of this word of pride. For me, as a little boy, I had what was called pride, but pride in the sense of, oh, you're too proud. And then as I got older, I had a mentor who told me, well, it's defiance. Your pride is your defiance. You're defiant in the face of those who would not allow you to share the table from where they would ordinarily just give you scraps. Because as they say, if we're not taking a seat at the table, we're on the menu. And so for me personally, anger is valid, defiance is valid, joy is valid, and our trauma, as much as we would like to turn our backs on our trauma, Our trauma is also in our DNA, and it also fuels us. All of these things, in my personal opinion, all form the tapestry that is, in my essence, pride. I would not be who I am if I had not lived the experiences that I have lived. And so seeing what happened to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Elijah, the young prodigy, who was going grocery shopping, was a violin player who, for everyone else's story, who was the most innocent person you could possibly imagine and is executed not only by the police, by first responders, by paramedics. My pride is my defiance and my anger and my trauma and my pain, but also my joy, my love for my husband, my love for my family, and my love for myself. And these are the things that I think we find when you read this anthology, where you find so many inspiring stories, but pride is not simply a parade in New York, a parade in Australia. It is not simply 124 BPMs in a nightclub. Pride is also our anger and our defiance, our protest, our joy, our pain, our sorrow, our mourning, our loss, all of these things which have, for me personally, made me the man that I am today. I just wanted to add that because I don't want anyone to listen to what Anne said and blame her, because she is valid in saying that she was an angry woman. She has every reason to be an angry woman. Mm-hmm. Because there is this long-going campaign against Black women that they should not be angry. Then what should they be?
They should be awesome.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But if they are angry, it's valid to be angry. My mother was angry for so many years because her mother was raped. And then her brother was accused of flirting with a white woman in the time of Medgar Evers, in the time of all this, when he never flirted with her, and they were going to lynch him. And my mother was very angry. Yet, at that time during Jim Crow, to be angry in the face of a lynch mob is, oh, well, she's guilty too. Let's lynch her ass too. Excuse my French. But anger is definitely valid. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Akil. Yeah, we appreciate that. And that kind of ties really perfectly into something that LaToya said that was really profound, that we have to speak out because silence is taken as consent. And so I think that that's really powerful. Hit really home for me that, yeah, silence is consent and the importance of speaking out. So thank you all for sharing a little bit more about where you were at, where you came from, your personal stories. And I want to turn over a little bit to Anne to talk a little bit about the anthology. And can you tell a little bit about how that came to be, how the idea came to be, and like your mindset, like when you were learned about the anthology, and how did you channel that all those feelings into this project? Curious about that.
Well, Bold Stroke Books, at the time that everything was happening, I had emailed them and said, if there's anything that I can do, as you know, and I literally was a newly author to them, but being that there's not a heavy case of Black authors with Bold Stroke Books. Mm-hmm. Being one of the newer Black authors, I felt, okay, maybe I can do something here. And I emailed and said, if there's anything that I can do to help with your wanting to show that you support the BIPOC community, that you are more than happy to bring their voices out, please let me know. Just anything, I'll do anything. And literally, I'll say about a week later, I received the email saying, we're thinking of doing this anthology, and we'd love if you would help us do this and kind of run, and just read the stories. And they handed it to me and gave me this gift that I felt like, I'm not worthy kind of thing, to bring these voices out. And that's how it came about. And then to have to read, I think we had maybe 100. I can't exactly remember the number. We had so many, though. There were so many stories to read. and there were so many wonderful stories to read. And to have to narrow it down to the amount that we have within the anthology was really tough. And how I had to go about choosing was, okay, let me see what story, if I were reading these, what story would I want to see as a full length novel?
Mm.
What would I want to see go on? What stories would I want to see? I want to know more about these characters, not just who they are as, fictional characters, but as a character of any race, color, blue, green, black, whatever, whatever planet they came from, whatever country they came from. Who are these characters, and what makes me want to relate to them, or what can I do? What can I relate to them for, and what other people will be able to relate? And that's how I ended up having to choose it, because I was like sending, okay, I like this one, I like this one, okay, I like this one, and they were like, okay, Leslie, we need to cut it down. You need to, I'm like, okay, if I have to. So, so I feel like I'm not going to say I chose the best of them all. I'm going to say I chose the ones I felt more related to in a way, or I felt was more relatable to others in a way. If we can do a second one and bring those others in, that would be great too. But it's a project that I feel very much pride in. And not just because there are well-known authors in there, but the voices of the unknown authors, the ones that didn't have the courage before that to share their stories, fictional or otherwise. And I feel like I feel a lot of pride. So it's hard to explain it, but my heart, every time I think about this, and every time, and I was talking to, we had a little family gathering yesterday, and I gave two of the books to my cousin, his partner, and their friend. And I said, I just want you to share this and tell everybody about it, because I want to be able to share my joy in it, and just as much as I feel for it, and just as much as the authors felt writing those stories. So I could go on forever, so I'm going to stop here.
That's perfect. That's really perfect. Yeah, and I imagine, you said I don't feel worthy, but you are worthy, and you did it. And how did that? Well, you did already answer. You feel prideful. I talk a little bit about the joy coming from that. I mean, because it is power. You were given power. Power was shared with you. And we talk a lot about sharing power in the community to, be more equal. What did that feel like? That to have that? You're the decision maker. What did that feel like?
Well, see, and that's where, not that I didn't feel worthy as a person, but as a writer, because I'm a new writer, and I'm having to choose stories. And like I said, some are from writers that I admire, and I'm looking at them like, if I said no to her story or his story, what am I, how am I going to face this person later on at an event? And they say, you didn't pick my story. So that's where the I didn't feel worthy part.
Got it.
I forgot the other question. I'm sorry.
Oh, it just must bring you a lot of joy to have done this project. I mean, you did this. You helped make this happen. It's really cool.
I did that. I had a hand in it, and I will happily do it again. I will. It's like laying my heart out, and to be able to also put a story in it as well. It's like taking my heart and sharing it with other writers, and also receiving their love in return, and bottling it up and putting it in this book for the world to also share, and to have their stories told in such beautiful ways. Mayapee's, that one was just like, I was getting mad at first. But I loved how it ended. It was a beautiful ending to the story. It wasn't an angry ending. It wasn't it was how it should have ended. So there's just so much richness in there, that it just, like I said, the pride I feel, and being able to share their voices, and be able to give the world And I want this to be across the world, to be able to give the world these stories is something that I never thought I would be able to do as a writer. Sharing my voice is one thing, sharing others is another.
That's really cool. And perfect segue into the next question. If each of us can briefly summarize what you submitted to the anthology and what it's about. Let's start with Mayapee.
Okay, well, no, thank you. And that was really beautiful what you said, because when I think about my main character in this story, he was very, very, he was very angry. I mean, it's what I've talked about in my own story. I mean, my main character, without giving too much away, he's in a career that, he makes a lot of money, but it's not really what he's passionate about. And he's being fixed up to marry a woman, forced by the family. He's in his 30s, and then it's actually lockdown that makes him realize that, what, I don't want to live like this. I can't be married to a woman. I'm not being fair on this woman. I mean, he looks at this woman as a good friend, but there's no chemistry there. There's no passion, and he just feels that talking about anger, that he realised that, well, okay, if he did do what his mother wanted and married this woman, then he would be feeling a lot of anger and resentment, and he realised that that's not how he wants to live his life. His life all mapped out, and the fiance was living with them, and he just thought, this is how my life could be. I could turn into this really angry, resentful person, and that's how he realized that I don't want to have this career that's been mapped out for me, and I want to be with a man. And this writing was experimental for me because I've never written from a man's perspective. And I think sometimes to detach myself, because I write about my own experiences a lot, but a few people within some writers groups I've been to, people have suggested that, well, why don't you write from a different perspective? Why don't you write, say, from a man's perspective? And I thought, it was very experimental for me to write from a man's perspective. So that's how that character came about, and that's what it's about, really. I mean, this character, realizing that he's resentful, and then the story that unfolds later on is, this is not how I want to live my life, and I've not just got to be fair to myself. I've got to be fair to these people, around me. This woman, I don't love her. What am I doing to her? I'm stopping her from, loving somebody else if I marry her when I'm not attracted to her. So that's what my contribution was about, really.
Thank you. LaToya, what did you submit?
My piece is called Art Appreciation, and really based on an experience I had when I was a freshman in college. I was a nude figure drawing model. And the semester following my experience, I was walking to my dorm room. I was stopped by a student who was in that class. Her comment was, "Did you pose nude? Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have classes in the art?" No, I posed for a figure drawing class. And she replied, "Oh, you look different with your clothes on." And I didn't have a really snappy response at that time, but I mulled on it. And so I'm of a fuller body frame, and my other sisters and my sexuality is also embraced fuller frame. Appreciation was more so about a woman who had posed nude for a figure drawing class, encountered one year so later, and reflect on what her posing nude really meant in her acceptance of self. And I incorporated her lesbian identity in the story, but I was more so focused on how do we claim all facets of our personality when you say this isn't acceptable. As a lesbian, yes, I in certain circles sort of translate that into a woman who is a little thicker in the hips not being accepted as well, and how she overcomes that, how she claims that, and by claiming that, how she allows herself to open herself up to other experiences.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. Akil, what did you submit?
My submission is an excerpt from a novel series of literary fantasy. The story that you have in the anthology The premise is this: Geronimo is a seer. That is someone who can speak to the living and the dead and the in-between. And he lives in DuPont Circle in a nice brownstone with his husband, well, soon-to-be husband. And one day during breakfast, he smells his fingertips and smells cigarettes on his fingertips. But here's the catch: he doesn't smoke. So he investigates, what is this smell coming from? So he goes into the bathroom, and that's where his saga kind of begins, because then he is suddenly thrust into someone else's story. And for people who kind of follow the thread of what seers or clairvoyants or people who are liaisons between the living and the dead discern as good smells and bad smells, ash is not necessarily a good smell. It isn't necessarily linked to spirits who have crossed over who are at peace. Cigarette ash is possibly linked to something that is malicious or, for all intents and purposes, evil. And that's where this particular excerpt begins. And it's called Last Call for Lovers, which is kind of a play on words for what is later to come in the story.
Very cool. This is really interesting, the use of senses, focusing on that in your short story. And what about you? What did you submit?
Yes. So because I love my twist on fairy tales, as my first book will tell you, Fem Tales, I did a twist on The Little Mermaid. And the story is about a woman who is grieving the loss of she had several family members lost at one time. Her brother and his family in a car accident, her mother shortly after, because she had a stroke, and her family has come to deal with it, but it's been almost a year now, and they've sent her away to grieve. They've got her this 1 month package at this resort for healing in Jamaica. And I based this on an actual resort in Jamaica where there's like no television, it's just the beach, the healing, the meditation and everything. They send her to this resort to heal, and she's having a particularly bad night, and she's on the beach just crying and weeping. And the mermaid character, Bele, is in the ocean after returning from an assignment. Mami Wata is the water. She's the goddess of sea creatures and of land serpents, and she's also the goddess of the mermaids. So Mami Wata has sent Ebele and her sisters to Africa for an assignment. They're returning from that assignment, and they're passing by where Lindsay, the main character, is, and she hears her crying. And Ebele is a goddess of sympathy, of caring. So her assignments are always to heal, to bring people from grief and to heal. So she's the only one that hears this cry. Her sisters don't hear it. So now she's like, oh God, now I'm stuck I just finished one assignment. I can't go home now. We've been away for months. Now I've got to go heal somebody. So she appears before Lindsay. And at the time, Lindsay doesn't know she's a mermaid. And the story progresses into her finding out who Abele really is. Abele falls in love. They fall in love, and read the story from there.
Thank you. Yeah, so there are 16 if I did the math right, 16 short stories in here, and they all sound amazing. And I took a similar approach as you, and I did a retelling of the story of the Puchen, which is a shapeshifter and a blood-sucking shapeshifter, and it's all about bird researchers in northern Mexico, and they're out there banding birds for research, and there's a little bit of paranoia, the story of the shapeshifter, the Puchen, and then there's kind of like it grows and soon borders on lunacy, and so it's kind of like a short story based on that. And I just had a lot of fun with it, and I was just like, it was just a really fun outlet and short story, and So I think we all had fun with it, and looking forward to reading. I'm about halfway through, so we got a little bit of
Well, I
reading
have
to
to
do.
say, the twist at the end of yours and Akil's is awesome. I love and that right there was just great, especially yours. I was like, I knew it.
Did you? Cool. Well, yeah, I mean, it was really a lot of fun. I love twists, and I'm experimenting with them a little bit more in my writing. And so for me, I was like, I'm just going to put this out there and see what they think about it. So I'm glad you liked it. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So we're going to talk a little bit about personhood and how personhood affects you as a writer. But to start, and to quote Audre Lorde, the self-described Black lesbian, mother, and feminist, there's always someone asking you to underline one piece of yourself, whether it's Black, woman, mother, dyke, teacher, etc., because that's the piece that they need to key in on, and they just want to dismiss everything else. And for people who hold multiple marginalized identities, at times it can feel overwhelming to explore the layers in those conversations with others, especially with people whose lived experiences are different than our own. And so, how do you address that in your writing? And what do you want people to know about you as a writer and as a person? Mayapee, let's start with you.
Yeah, that really resonates, because I'd say even though with my contribution for the anthology, it's written from a male perspective, there are elements of myself in there, because I'm, as a day job, I'm I'm a teacher, and then I've got these creative outlets, and then there's my personal life. So I think automatically, even though the character is fairly different to me, and it's a male character, it's always comes out. And I think the useful thing for me is trying to write from a different perspective, because I think it's good to put elements of yourself in there, but sometimes the problem that I've had is I've often been a little bit when I've written it from, say, my own point of view in my own voice as Mayapee, I've possibly held back a little bit. That's some of the critique I've had. I've possibly held back a little bit too much. But when I wrote my contribution for the anthology, I felt as though I didn't hold back as much, because I was actually in another character, but still putting elements of myself in there. And I was probably holding back a little bit, less, to be honest, especially with some of the dialogue. I'm possibly digressing from the question, but I'd say that it's your own experience. I mean, it does, come out, even because there might be things that you are holding in your subconscious as well, because I mean, from reading my story back, I'm like, I think these are a few things that I'm holding in my subconscious as well. This dilemma that you end up becoming very, very resentful. And like we touched on earlier, there's nothing wrong with anger, there's nothing wrong with resentment, but it's what you do with it. So I'd say your own personhood, I'd say it is inevitable, but it's a good thing when it comes out in your story as well, and that's what the cathartic writing process is.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Akil, what about you? What's your response?
Well, storytelling for me has always been rooted in dreams for me. Dreaming doesn't necessarily mean it's something that can't be made real. And what can be made real cannot necessarily mean that it's not a dream. For me, ever since I was a little boy, like any other child, I would lose countless hours make-believing. I had little toy action figures that I would play with, and I would lose myself for hours in my room, imagining all different kinds of scenarios with the different action figures, and I would blend them from different universes. So I had He-Man, I had Star Wars, I had G.I. Joe, all of these different action figures, but they were all on the same battlefield, or they were in the same laboratory. Han Solo was working hand in hand with Destro and the Cobra Commander, etc. Those are all kind of 80s references, but hey. And for me, it's kind of a bigger reflection of how things are for me today as an adult, where just because one thing is put in one box and another in another box, why don't we disrupt the platform and empty the boxes and put them all on the same scale? Storytelling for me is the idea of using dreams to paint the canvas. Dreams that can be made real or reality that has been made dreamlike. So in that sense, sometimes what you read seems almost fantastical, but it could very much have been very real. And sometimes what you read to be real actually was a fantasy. For example, you were talking about the cryptids and the folktales in Mexico. I am absolutely obsessed with this. On a side note, I'm actually working on a future docu-series where we get to investigate these kinds of things. Because for me, the idea of what we now consider to be fantasy or what cannot exist in the same space, at one point existed in similar spaces, in shared spaces. And I think that idea of multiplicity is essential for writing and for telling stories and for existing and for my own identity. I'm not one thing. None of us are. None of us are. None of us should ever be, because if we are, then we are doing a disservice to all the potential things that we can live up to be. That is my idea of storytelling, and that is my idea personally.
That is amazing. I love that so much. Just like, wow. I'm so glad that we're in this panel together, because I'm just learning so much from each and every one of you. That's one thing I really love about writing, is learning more about the craft of others and everybody's insights. So thank you for that. Now, LaToya, tell us a little bit about the intersection of who you are and how your personhood affects you as a writer.
I write because I refuse to let someone else define my reality. I've made a commitment to myself that when I write, all of my characters will reflect a facet of my personality that I feel is underrepresented in the media in terms of literary. I've made a commitment that all things that I write will incorporate a setting in North Carolina, because again, I'm a North Carolinian, and I apologize on behalf of Charlotte that you had such a bad reception, Akil. I lived in Charlotte for a number of years, but I'm also from a very small town in North Carolina called Southport. So I incorporate the large cities as well as the smaller cities. I'm also a sorority girl. I've been a member of my sorority, Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, for 30 years. All of my characters in all my works, I'm as a sorority girl. I'm also Southern. I love food, and I incorporate food. I feel food is the way that we can overcome so much, because you can't be angry with someone when your mouth is full of something good. So I write because I feel that I want to allow others to experience my reality. I feel because my words are a way I can define myself and others in a way that no one can take that away. You can be down of members with lesbian, because I am. I'm gonna write about it, and my characters are. So I feel that we have a responsibility to allow others to, in a sense, walk a mile in our shoes by creating characters that force readers to get to know someone, be it a fictional relationship, someone who represents someone that may not be someone they would encounter in their day in life. So when they do meet that Southern lesbian, or they do meet that woman who grew up in a small town in England who had experiences for someone who were unwilling to welcome someone who came from a different background and learn from them instead of shunning them and discriminating against them by right. And I want to incorporate my experiences so others can get to know me. Even if you don't meet me in person, you meet me and others like me through my words.
Thank you so much. And Anne, what about you? What do you want people to know about you as a writer, but also as a person?
Well, it's pride is a huge thing with my writing. Not just queer pride, but pride in who I am as an African American woman. I grew up with an uncle who was pretty much in the Black Panthers and was very militant. And I was born on Malcolm X's birthday, so I became his, his wonderful little, re-imaging of Malcolm X. So I grew up Black dolls, Black toys, Black everything. And, to have all that kind of brought me to the fact that if I ever, and I said this to myself, if I ever wrote anything, it would be with the pride of being a Black woman in mind. And as I started reading queer fiction, I noticed that there weren't, and LaToya could probably attest to this, there weren't a lot of positive imaging within the lesfic community, Black lesfic community. And I wanted to change that. And it kind of, and it's funny, Akil says this, most of my stories come to me in dreams. And I literally will wake up like there's the characters talking to me in my head, telling me, okay, hey, Les, what's up? This is my story. And we'll literally be sitting on a stoop somewhere or on a bench somewhere, and they're telling me their story. And that's how I build majority of my stories. You know, creativity comes in other ways, but the majority have come that way. And the one thing that I promise myself and my characters is that every main character, and I have all races within my books, but every main character is going to be a character of color. It's going to be a BIPOC character. And they're going to be lesbian, they're going to be queer, they're going to be trans. I have a book coming out. There's one of the characters, she's not a main character, but she's a huge support system for the main character, and a trans woman. And her story is somewhat told in there. I think it's important for me, and it represents who I am, that my characters represent me as a person. I'm a queer Black woman, and my characters are going to be queer Black women, and that's who I am. That's how my writing goes, and I always figure if because people always ask me, well, why don't you just why can't you make another character or a white character? Well, if you don't like my stories, don't read them. What you don't read, someone else will. So and not to be rude, but I won't miss you.
Yeah, that's so great. And yeah, it took me a little while to get to that point. First couple of books had a Latinx character and a white character. I'm married to a white woman, and that's was my reality. But I'm moving on to only Latinx characters because why not? I'm the writer. I can do it, and it brings me a tremendous amount of joy, and also shows that you have to. My sense of who I am as a Mexican American is very different than somebody else who's Mexican American. And we're not all the same, and our Spanish is different, and I speak perfect Spanglish. And so it's a joy to be able to represent two distinct people or multiple distinct Latinx characters in my writing. So there's a lot of joy that comes with that. So let's pivot a little bit and let's wrap up with something that's extremely important, racial diversity in the literary community. And the notion that publishing has a diversity problem isn't up for debate anymore. We have data to back up these long-held assumptions, and national and international organizations both have led research to better understand diversity in publishing. And through this research, we understand more about the trends. We know who's being published, the works being published, the barriers to inclusion. And there's a growing list of examples of how publishing could be more diverse. However, progress has been, and I'm quoting the Lee and Low Diversity Baseline Survey 2.0, statistically insignificant. And to quote myself, publishing is still pretty darn white. My question to you, to each of you, is what can readers and publishing industry folks do to support BIPOC voices? And let's start with LaToya.
I think the best thing to do is support authors and provide opportunities for us to get published. I applaud Bold Strokes for doing this anthology. I think this is proof and testament that we are out here writing stories that reflect our realities, allow us the opportunity to get the word out. I believe that we as readers need to support BIPOC writers, buy the work, talk about the work, review the work, share the work with others, because there is a list of so many authors who are putting in the work who are not recognized. I do not discredit those big names that gets all the shine, but for every Fiona Zed that is a noted Black lesbian writer, there's at least 20 writers that I know, 10 of which I have on my bookshelves that are putting in work that is just as good, if not, depending on what your taste is, a little bit better. But until we share that with other people, until we tell someone, oh, I read this story, it is phenomenal. Why don't you read this story? And then why don't you read this story and that story and this story? Just from my personal experience, this anthology has opened my eyes to so many. Was it 15 other writers who are dazzling in their work, who have allowed me to see and walk the shores of Jamaica, who have allowed me to be in a flat in London, who has allowed me to be in a house in DuPont Circle, hunting birds in Mexico, from sitting on my couch. That is something that is worth more than what the cost of the book is. And I encourage others, if you claim to be a reader, Netflix and Hulu and all these other streaming services, they have enough subscribers. The 2 hours you said binging on The Crown, pick up a work by a BIPOC author, read it, do a review on Amazon, and share and spread the love.
Beautiful, beautifully said. And that you answered the second part of the question, what one action the people can take to inspire change. Yeah, leave a review. You know, that's how information gets out. Like, take 5 minutes from Bridgerton, come on, and let's write a review about a book that you love by a BIPOC author. All right, Mayapee, what can readers and industry folks do to support BIPOC voices? What's your answer?
Yeah, I think LaToya has and Anne have touched on it quite a lot already, because the problem that I've found, what I've found in Leicester is it's very, very close-knit. So sometimes when it comes to poetry events, they like to, play it a little bit safe and, to maybe take on somebody who has brought in crowds. They want, they really want to play it safe. But then I think Anne has really shown with the anthology, the standard has been really high, but then there's been a very, very diverse range of stories, and these little things make a difference. I mean, if somebody writes something, share it on social media, leave a review, and be a little bit open to experimenting with something that might be a little bit. I mean, the writing is a little bit different. I mean, I'd say, yeah, these little things matter. I mean, I think Anne has, really, I think a lot of people like to, play it very, very safe. And I think Anne has really shown, because some fantastic, editors are there at Bold Strokes who will really work with you. I mean, if they feel that there are a few things that, okay, well, this could do with a bit of fine tuning, people will work with you. And I think taking that risk that, okay, this is an author who I think we should, give an opportunity to, because even at, say at first value, you think that, well, no, I'm not going to take a risk. I think that's possibly what the problem is with, I think, is not wanting to take that risk, to be honest. It's really, just wanting to play it safe. And I think writing, I don't think any of us write because we want to play it safe. I think writing is about taking a risk, taking that gamble. And I think that's a way you can give opportunities to BIPOC authors.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Really great specific actions. And yeah, take a risk. I like that a lot. I've heard that before, and as a fear, as a barrier, that publishers don't want to take that risk. They don't want to be pigeonholed. And so that showed up in, I think it's called Spread the Word. It was a study out of the UK that showed that exact same thing. So,
I mean, just to continue that, I mean, Mills and Boon, they're publishers, they're very, very, they're very into their formulas, and they're very restricted. I mean, they've been going for hundreds of years, literally. Recently, they have started, taking on LGBTQ stories. I think they did something the other day saying, pitch your story. And I think, like a few years ago, they would not have done that. And I would say little things like that really, really help, to be honest. Take that, take that risk, really. It's not always about taking somebody who's established or taking somebody who you feel safe with. Just, consider somebody else. And, I've already proved with the anthology, you can, work with them. There are ways that you can really work with people.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Akil, what can readers and publishing industry folks do today to support BIPOC voices?
I think I'm going to take the unfiltered approach in answering this question. given that I'm a New Yorker and I guess they consider me Parisian now since I've been here so long. One of the very first things I think we absolutely need to do is change the gatekeepers.
Mhm.
Absolutely change the gatekeepers. People say publishing is so white because publishing is so white. When the agents and the publishing houses are majority white, and when people of color, when Black, Indigenous people of color submit their work to be considered, and the gatekeepers say, I don't relate to your story. You don't relate to your story because it's not your story.
Mhm.
This is my story. I don't relate to your story, but I read it. I didn't live in a country home with three blonde sisters who were pining over one man who lives in another country home. I lived in upstate New York, and the people on my street were like the people you see in this panel. That's how diverse my street was. But when we're talking about publishing being so white, and a writer like me, or like Anne, or like LaToya, or Mayapee, or Celeste submit something of value, something unique, and a gatekeeper says, I don't relate to your story, so I don't think the market is ready for it. I think it's time to change the gatekeepers. It's time for Simon and Schuster to reconsider who they decide they want to give a book contract to, when that same book contract could be going to a poignant writer who might inspire thousands upon thousands of young readers, as opposed to someone who inspired an insurrection at the Capitol, for example.
Mhm.
Or an agent who in one breath says that they're there for Black, Indigenous people of color, but in another breath will tweet on social media how one of their writers is dumb and, I'm not going to say the word, but a condescending word for someone on the spectrum, for example. These are the kinds of people who are the gatekeepers, and it's time for these kinds of gatekeepers to be cashiered as they would old, useless horses that are no longer able to race. Put them out to pasture and make the publishing industry reflect the people who are actually reading and writing, number one. Number two, when we're talking about the education system, it's time to get rid of these old standards of what are classics and bring in stories that represent the full spectrum of who reads. You know, nothing against Emily Bronte, nothing against Catcher in the Rye, but I never once read any books by Black, Indigenous people of color until I went to Howard University. And then when I went to graduate school, it was grace of my education at Howard University that I was able to say to other writers, well, wait a minute, you want to talk about Shakespeare? I can compare Shakespeare to this writer over here, who is also a classic. It's not considered a classic in your Western sphere, but in Nigeria, this writer is just as valued and worthy as Shakespeare is. Or in Senegal, this writer is just as valued as worthy as Shakespeare is. In Mali, this writer predates Shakespeare. But we don't have that conversation. We don't have that conversation because publishing remains so white and the gatekeepers remain so white. Until we change the gatekeepers, until we force the gatekeepers to change and represent who we are, publishing will continue to remain so white. And we can do that a number of ways. We can do it when we go to the bookstores. We can demand that the bookstores carry our authors, or we will no longer consider supporting them. We will tell the publishers, you will represent the readership, or we will no longer consider supporting them. We will tell the agents, you will represent the readership, or we will no longer continue to support you. It is absolutely essential that the gatekeepers must reflect who are the readership and who are the storytellers, and get rid of this old dated idea that some country home where three blonde sisters pining over one blonde blue-eyed guy is a classic, when my story or your story or your story or your story is not valid nor relatable or real for some reason, because blonde-haired, blue-eyed sister who's pining over the same boyfriend, which has been told a million times on Netflix, is somehow a classic. And that's how you change publishing.
Yeah, gatekeepers are white. Editorial boards are white, majority white. Reviewers are majority white, and this is coming from the Lee and Low books. 1.0 survey. Yeah, get more people of color, give them more opportunities to break into the publishing industry, do paid internships. I've seen some of those happening with Latinx in publishing. And there's recommendations upon recommendations that are in line with everything you said. So I appreciate you giving those specific examples of what I can do and what LaToya can do and what individuals can do. Because sometimes I think thinking about like the systemic changes feels so big to tackle, but there are one thing that I can do today, you know, put books in my free little library, request books by BIPOC authors at my library. And so, yeah, those are brilliant. So Anne, what say you? What say you about this?
So for readers, I would like to send this challenge out. When you buy a book by a BIPOC author, buy two and give one to someone else. And and tell them, okay, so I've given you this book. So your challenge is when next time you buy a book by a BIPOC author, you do the same. Which is what like I said, I gave my cousin and his boyfriend and their friend a book. But I said, my challenge to you is spread the word, buy the actual book, and give it to your friends or whomever. So that's my challenge to the reader, to get more people to read our books, to read more. And I'm going to send a challenge out to publishers. Instead of waiting for the writers to come to you, if you see that an independent writer, and there are a lot of BIPOC independent writers because they are not able to go to these big publishing houses and get past these gatekeepers that Akil talked about and get their stories out there, go to them and say, look, I've read your work. I would like for you to do something for us. Even if it's just one short story, one book, reach out to them. Don't wait for submissions to come to you. And I know that's hard to do because these publishing companies, especially the smaller ones like Bold Stroke Books and Bella Books and all those, are smaller and their staff isn't a huge staff. I understand that. But if you have to get some of your writers, some of your writers have said, you know, reach out to them and say, okay, is there a Black independent author that you've read that you think would fit Bold Stroke Books or Bella Books or whomever? Tell us. And we will reach out to them to see if they would be willing to come to us and publish. That way, they're not having to spend because I've self-published. They're not spending their hard-earned money trying to, you know, put their work out there. They're not spending a lot more time than they really need trying to market on their own. They're not trying to figure out how am I going to edit or pay for editing or anything else. And they're also not growing in their writing because they don't have a team like Bold Stroke Books like I have. They have taught me so much, and my writing has changed by leaps and bounds from my independent days to now because I have a team behind me who is helping to support me. And that's what BIPOC authors need. They need a team of people to help them. There are some great stories out there, and I've started reading some great stories by BIPOC authors, but I can't finish them because I'm like, oh my God, if they could just do this, if someone had just told them to do that, if they had a professional editor help them with this would be such a great story. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of good stories that could become great, but we need the support. And I challenge these publishers, big or small, reach out to the independent writers and bring them in your fold. Who's going to say no to not having to pay out of pocket for their own book? Mm-hmm. I mean,
yeah,
that's my challenge. So my challenge to readers and to publishers, and that's what I have.
Beautiful.
Just to carry on from that point, I agree with you, Anne. Because I mean, if you don't want to, you know, take a big risk with a big novel, then start with a novella or a short story if you really don't want to take that risk and spend a bit of time, you know, honing their talents a little bit. Like, you know, okay, you know, you might not be ready, but let's try this. And you do have a team of editors who, you know, work with you if they've got, you know, a good story, but they want to make it a great story. I absolutely, you know, that really resonates with me. And you know, thank you both for everybody for what you've said. Brilliant.
Yeah. Thanks,
I agree.
Mayapee.
Thank you.
Yeah, and there's like 16 authors in here, and I know you said that, and I'm not familiar with all of them, but I wonder who in here this is like their debut work. I don't know, but you got a ready list right here, which is the value of this Own Voices anthology gives that authors or publishers, hey, here's your Rolodex, if you will, and to go beyond like signing authors of color, BIPOC authors, but investing the resources and also promoting them. It's one thing to sign, it's another thing to give the resources to help them succeed. And so, brilliant ideas. You heard it here, and I'm so grateful to be a part of this amazing panel for this incredible conversation. As we close, where can readers find more information about you and your work? Let's start with LaToya.
The best place to find out information about work is at our website, which is www.LaToya, LATOYA, Hankins, HANKINS, first and last name altogether.com. You can always Google me, LaToya Hankins, as well as you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. It's pretty much my name, or you can follow me on Instagram as Toya Hankins, but I would say my website is the best resource.
Thank you. And Akil.
A few places you can find me. Later this year, I'm launching a new docuseries called The Normal Show. It's a new platform for long-form documentaries. The docuseries is each a standalone documentary in the series, as well as news and news analysis. So you can find that at thenormalshow.tv, but also on social media at Instagram is, Twitter is at Akil Wingate. Some of my written work will be appearing in a number of anthologies this year. Of course, we definitely want you to go out and get your copy of this anthology. And if you're in the UK, you can watch me every night live on Channel 5, presenting the game show, The Live Casino Show.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, Mayapee, where can we find you after today?
Okay, if you go on Amazon, then some of my books are already on Amazon. My name, Mayapee Chowdhury, I'm the only one in the world, so if you put my name into Google, it comes up. So yeah, I do play on that as well, my unique name. It comes up in Google when you put my name in, but I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook. Facebook, I've got my personal account, and I've got my Mayapee Chowdhury author account as well. I'm trying to get back into it again. I've been doing my blog, Maverick Mama Adventures. So, I post things on there sometimes, little bits of things that are, whatever's on my mind, really my passions. So those are the main places to find me, very active on social media. But as I said, I've got a name that's quite easy to find, which is Lucky. I'm also, there's a few things on YouTube as well. So those are the best places to find me.
Excellent. Anne, where can we find you after today?
So you can find my works on Bold Stroke Books. You can find me on, I have a website. It's www.annshaderomance.com. You can find me on Facebook at AnnShadeRomance. You can find me on Instagram at AnnShadeRomance. There's a theme there. And Twitter, which it seems there was more than one Ann Shade. So I'm Ann Shade 3. That's where you can find me.
Perfect. And I am Celeste Castro, and you can find me at Interlude Press and also at writerceleste.com or on social, Twitter and Instagram at writerceleste. And thank you all so very much for joining us at Pride Book Fest 2021.